will read a book for money in early May, and only copy down one single citation, page 95, translated from one moth into the proscenium arch of another. I'll walk around with it, glimmer and skirt the edge of its personality. The only note I'll take down in a notebook as the month opens itself up to itself. Signs, symptoms, immediately discernible causes, triggers, deep causes, concrete manifestations, and word games. As a boy, I would draw bad renditions of things on dinner tables in restaurants. Any inadequacies were always overtaken by ambition, and a napkin still stands to be and seems to me as good a canvas as anything else. Drawing plastic flowers in a restaurant was a means with which to make fun of the seasons. Examine a perpetual spring and consider it standing in the winter. It wanted to be employed, the flower, wanted a job for at least a little while, a calling, wanted to find a quiet cause for itself, something it could get up to on its own and then just disappear into. Like this place, a busy room full of other tokens, other things, raucous people. I would always draw at dinner, always looking to exact the resistance of the forever flower. The impossibility it would aim for, to open and close with the passing day, felt like something needing documentation out of such disposable means. Rather than let the importance of the thing recede into its own sense of perpetuity, imitating it would gift it the opportunity for real decay. Spring dreams of fall. The napkins were worked upon only to be thrown out. Talk about screenwriting somewhere over the week. The interviewer leans forward and asks him if he's the kind of guy that hangs on to perfect phrases, intimate anecdotes, closed illustrations, and stores them somewhere. Levinson simply ignores the question. He states, instead, that he's always tried to remember what it felt like to talk to any given someone, rather than recount what it was they'd said. What it felt like to be spoken to hear other people, hear them talk, other people trying, and talk to one another. It was like he was trying to sound out a voice of experience, rather than paint any picture of a victim of one. That's what it felt like talking to you, occasionally. Like we were trying to work out the rules of a fair game. Throwing stones from one side of the street to the other. Little Caesars, waging for the run of some middle ground. Wild horses, looking to rationalize the shape and structure of their wilderness. To be a storm, rather than be subjected to one. That was ever the aim. Throwing our bodies from one side of the street to the other.
Does it seem to you that there's an excessive amount of comparing one actor with another? When Olivier does something, he'll talk about feel goods, this and that, and you're Titus and Olivier's Titus and Veronicus and that kind of thing. Later, I've wondered if that introduces a feeling of competition always. Are you always aware of Olivier and feel good looking over your shoulder when you do a role?
Not so much Olivier because
Richard Burton talks to Dick Cavett on television in 1980 and embers on a conversation with Humphrey Bogart. Burton essays the idea that respect demands first name terms. He always refers to Bogey as Humphrey. He recalls a conversation when and where it was decided that American actors are all behaviorists. Although anecdotal, it's a remark that demands the present tense when returned to. I listen to them, hear them out. All I can think on is some bastardization of a little quotable phrase. Burton will only ever refer to Cavett as Dick, with a wry little smile. The mind turns behind the expression, and Burton thinks to himself that any person that likes to hang out over an abyss had better be a fucking eagle.
So I deliberately avoided watching narrative views, a very great fan.
When André Breton, René Char, and Paul Éluard had been in Avignon, they had been attempting to merge their individual personalities into a poetry in common. Driving in a car, there'll be 3 of a given 4 seats, 3 sides of a given shape, open at angles, pyramidic. They're not talking much, but when they do, they bleed into one another, converge. They're a picture of a common ground, of red and sunburned skin. The talk has a metallic sheen, a shine, and the captured light is scalding. They looked like a quartet of minarets. Sidling gently through the countryside, the 3 friends saw the road repair sign that provided the title for their work, Ralentir Travaux, slow work, and argue with indignation at the fact that any work done together is work done slowly, work done slow. No longer at work on an object of attention, the time taken would be the only means of interpretation. How long it would take to get from place to place. The world is a fan of durable things, in theory, and here they were staking a claim to the possibility of resilient things instead, seeing if a work could live beyond the work of it. Talking as more than one person at once, the 3 of them would have let all that noise drift into one coherent point of view. At a glance, it is a child, at pace. A child running through a huge fucking zoo, moving at a shutter speed, moving quick. We think a little about how long some things take and how other things last. With the attention span of a baby boy, they try and fix things for examination, one by one, here, here, and here. Little time to get used to much. So we move with them, always trying to refine a focus. Rig the mechanisms so it let in just enough light. Turn the distance into something else. Looking for it to last a little longer than a slow oil slick of an ice cream in June, they wrote it down. Talk was the wax of a candle designed to track time, crawling over a table. Talk was blank white bread. Words on paper defiantly carry a new and unknowable look. Every word on paper was a taxi. All their words then were cars in an older sense of the word. Feathers stick to tarred and old ideas. Hunks of metal pointing upwards, moving forwards. Little tributes to moving somewhere together and at speed. Stopping together. Starting again. Driving an idea forward. They could see glowing things looking backwards, but it didn't matter. You could yoke out the movement as something more than it actually was, something that feels pronounced when sat together in a passenger seat. Everything looking a little new behind glass, shuttling past. It was a look for a totaled commodity, your face reflected straight back at you in sun-kissed glass, a smooth, flat surface. Maybe we're getting closer now, getting warmer. It was hard to say. The car shifts under the volume of the blah, 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 and now we're getting somewhere. Breton bums the smoke from Char, whilst Éluard chews gum all de mieux. René leans forward in the passenger seat and drags his leg up. Sitting cross-legged, he holds his right ankle in his left hand and his left ankle in his right. He looks out the window. Éluard says something about the view, whilst framing his field of vision in a border of thumbs and fingers. Char keeps on driving. He says there is no reason for them to stop. Wild intelligence needed its wild abandon, he says. Its wild indifference to anything around them, that was the grosser thing. The more and more they thought about themselves, talk about themselves, the more and more the world outside the car would disappear. They were at work on a literature of non-participation. Sometimes that made me feel a little sick, but less so as today moves on and on. Its new look spins me out some. Prefacing their slow work, the three of them, Char, Breton, and Éluard, would scratch down little thoughts to serve as preface. Breton writes about the three of them sat at one table, imagining 3 different tables. Slipping away from the party unnoticed, they'll look for a new means of looking, only to register at cross purposes. Everybody has seen a table, but when we say table, the trouble is that right now this table is for Monsieur Breton, a café table, because he drinks. For Monsieur Char, a gambling table, because he doesn't gamble. For Monsieur Éluard, an operating table, because this morning he passed by the Place de l'Opéra. If any one of these gentlemen says table, you see what comes of it. Having once made tabula rasa of whoever listens to them saying the word table, one after the other, poetry goes its own way, like the Tarn as it delightfully floods the southwest. peer over the brim of a generative contradiction and consider the conditions of success. Like royal crown weathered by Coca-Cola, the odds are stacked against us, like Veronica Lake, Walden Pond, and River Phoenix. You are subtly making up your hair in the storefront glass. The clean surface sits still like an estranged object that could now run under your moniker. We'll name the shop after you and work out what we have left to sell. That's me, you say, catching your own eye in open palms, but knowing full well that I'm looking straight at you. You pull a face that looks more like mine. Every resource is pooled in here. We pick out some groceries, pick out some wine. In the glass, we play with the negative impress of our better qualities, and angels, the way that I would relish the expressionism of a bad TV set. How, having regular access to a bad colour model as a child, I'd ember and ocean its wonder, educate my line of sight. Football games on red earth with green faces, and Rothko, Motherwell, and Klein. And I imagine the things other people would have purposed this wooden table for before I'd given it some employ. Turning the wood like a gross carpenter as we walk the block and dovetail. Silhouettes merging with some variety of tree, matter for matter. A post oak, live oak, a bur oak, or Shumard red. And I'd heard that seasonal growth should stretch out the limbs for any distance from 3 to 24 or more inches. So I stretch out my arm and imagine pulling ideas out from beneath the following lines of your hand. Here and here. Knowing you've a safe pair of palms, we cut the difference between the right and left. Age lines and arcs. This one looks to simply remake or reframe a tree, to burn one down and build things from the things between the idea of a garden and its furniture. This one is a kitchen and a perfect version of another country, childlike and playing with our food, and so perfect that it didn't need to be entertained as anything other than a good idea or a fog of memory, like a well-oiled pen or a smoke, aiming to be a version of a timekeeper. And then, just a pair of hands again, tools, and nothing more, and common prayer, mouthing the shape of season, in the hopes of a little change, and drawing a line through to smaller coins and the absence of our commonality, or a run of green arms waving wild and looking to a throw of birds or a near mirror as evidence of radical change, of an hour animated with real and palpable ambitions, just like this one. So the candle burns as though we're a sunset. In person, no song. And running with candle wax over 3 or 4 blunt fingertips and touching the tabletop. Repeatedly signalling some things, and again we withdraw others with an equal earnestness. Tar and feather, you are a grackle, reminding me of someone else. A table of contents, like or rattled like mustard seed, or ghosts in sunlight. We talk to the table, we talk over and chew, and I don't know the tree these owe to, but both of these tables owe to one of my two grandfathers, so I've been told. And there's one I'll work on for now, and another for the longer days. And we've moved the latter to its stable point in the garden, so it can get dressed up like I'm keeping minutes, and pictures of Germany and Texas in bloom. But that owes to the other name, and so I think of other countries when I sit either here or there, and there or here, and I remember the game that we used to play when I was young, making believe we were both children, and we'd speak at length to one another's shadow, as we'd walk the length of the road from there to here, here to there, and then try and recall what our shadows had given their time and talking to. There to here, walking back, the being and doing, and ambition and verve, and the memory of it is a fucking zoom, and you're pulling impressions of animals which were and are unusually convincing, all hyena and horse, and the ways in which my mother still runs with a conviction that, lying down in an occasional field of inquiry, she can and could talk to livestock in long noises, both moving them and being moved, and that was always credible, knowing that all noises are disputable, and to speak is ever to engineer the promise of a sustainable silence, a kind of a death. But the animals had a credulity that they'd carry, and her conviction probably came from you. And I think of that as I sit here, shadow reading, a pedagogical technique in which learners shadow their interlocutors, that is, repeat what others say, either completely or selectively, or engage in conversational interaction that, in the main, tries concern itself with the what of what is being said, where language learners try to speak along in common claims and sing and imitate the sounds they hear rather than trying to understand what is being said. As we count the page numbers, varieties of herbivore and cow, 426, or 7, 11, or 62, first out loud and then in a lower tone, and finally, silently and together, and of sound mind. We move, opportunistic, like a quick disease ever asking, where are my zones of proximal development? Where do you want to live? And as mutually constructed by two, an insurmountable extent of meaning, run by two readers at work, shadows in play, two palms that what talk to each other, and while they deploy a text through multiple repetitions, summaries, retellings, and a collaborative tête-à-tête, designating another idea to repeat to each other and read along in both immediate and delayed conditions, like a ride along without consequence, chasing simply a decent view of a city at night, the city at night. And they are marking the text for stress, and they listen for emphasis or spotlights, godlights, good nights for each other, and making good on love, testifying to it in thicker syllables. It's a belly feeling rather than a belief system, and they have to start and finish at the same time and aim to grow fat together. And this works well after some exposure to the rules of pronunciation, connected speech and intonation, and waging, profiteering on occasion. But I was spending money I didn't have, and the mineral properties of the family were shifting, just like they did when my grandfather was a quarry, and my father flacked water. My mother would fight objects and materials in land, whilst my wood brother combed his hair, and my sister combed the beach, and my grandmothers were minarets, not symmetrical but calling people, often, and giving names to things. And I felt like a mine, no diamonds, and it's Sunday, like it's 6 kissing cousins decided it should be. And this is where we are, talking, here, under bad constellations, and there is wax all over this book, an index full of all of our distractions, leafing the floor and pacing the bar. We turn our attention again to awful things, hide in aurora, in vapor and smoke, and if things needed to be looked at another way, participation was the only word I wanted to think about, the romance of it, the burr of a temporary partnership, a conversation rather than a marriage of convenience, and a want to look at my table differently. And I knew that every I would contradict all of that. But I was nothing but a contraction of that we at any rate, a contradiction in part. The small wonders of the word, reversed in a mirror. And we'll all talk a lot in June. A lot of what we talk about is important. An assortment of flags. Some of it triggers a little reflection on a future or two. Being here in another decade or so, or not, and wherever else. And the month begins, and it ties itself to things in fits and starts, and we feel like we could wrap ourselves in something again, unflagged. That, or at least carry on for a little longer. I'll stick with bedsheets again as a favourite symbol for a time, a quilt, or a blanket of feeling, a collage of fabrics tethered into a little landscape, a still life for a little longer, of mountains and plains and things, and we're fighting, or else need fight for something, as throws of birds bind the squares of the quilt into some make-believe concord, or something sound as a song, an eagle, abyssal, driving the noise of a sedan or a Detroit, and we're painting little pictures on the sides of things and naming them after moments of empathy, feeling. And as the colours start running a little, it's a picture of a child in an enormous zoo. They're running, 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 a sprint of aurora and of smoke again, or the spray of a wave, and en route to an erstwhile dinner of ramen and cheap wine, cruising for simile. My memories of water are multiple, and I enjoyed thinking through the significance of water as some kind of model or metaphor for a consideration of the various weaknesses of my research. It was better than any kind of bellwether, any impetus to work for money or meaning, to pass the hand slowly below the waterline, a palm's breadth below the surface, and push against its gentle pressure. It did push back, always, and reliably, and solidly. It always had a little ambition, the water. The weight of all this water against the back of my right hand. Emile Durkheim suggests that when people spoke of a force external to themselves, which they are powerless to control, their subject was scarcely God, but social organization. That something else was turning something else on at the waterline, working with that push, only to turn it off again. And this canal feels like a kettle hole lake, a great depression in an outwashed plain, formed by retreating glaciers or draining floodwaters. But it felt good that the water was trying to stage its own little something to try on a paradigm with you. And we're homing in on our demand for an evening's calmer qualities, which are always like a soundscape, a desert, filtered through painted brushes and moved around by a minor wind in negative relief, turning your face again away from the storefront. We pick up the wine, we leave. June 3rd. Shaving my face in the mirror, I think about how I don't want to wear clothes anymore. But realizing my relationship to the wild is nothing but a wild indifference, I realize that the wind of all that would be nothing is nothing but a would-be invention rather than any real remembrance. So I look straight ahead and build an unrepeatable and non-transferable consciousness, more and more intense in itself. And I don't know what the wind sounds like in any particular tree. So rather than go to the country, I just want to put my body in as many countries as possible and work grammatically rather than chronologically. Hear the sounds of them merge, confusing tongues, collapsing boundaries with the mottle and aurora of breaking water, and just watch our feet slip. Here, 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 and here. The seaweed like ice, moving quicksilver from point A to impulse X, through to idea Y and illusion B. We let our conclusions run off of unkempt surfaces and let little ideas slide off the shoulders out of some ragged suit of togetherness and into another borrowed idea, knowing that all we can do is try and maintain ourselves in the various caverns of our sensibility. You in yourself, me in mine. And it's Monday morning, and I can't think of a single thing that I would raise a flag to, but we can dissimulate that noise though, the ripple of those higher fabrics as we raise nothing but open palms and consider the shape of sentiment and of serenity. Although the acoustics of a turn of phrase like that compete with the meaning therein, there's something there, a song, like Highway to Hell, Cross on the Highway, or Highway Don't Care, the Louvin brothers. And I wonder what lines I'd write down if I was going to ever try and write my way into a nighttime and all of its amber words. And between the stop and start of a good impression, like I'm your huckleberry, or speaking of and in an umber and autumn palette, and weathering the paradigm, knowing that the better and bested of owing a little blood to someone else, as in a love affair with the idea of a secession, or a night alone, and not as in retreat or as in Texas or the withdrawing of an index finger, but as in love, as in redrawing any given thing so as to better consider the question of any given thing in its direct work. A vase, say, that neglects to remember a flower as concept or idea, no self-knowledge, and various failures to have come to terms successfully with the bend of its arc. The plant leaning towards its light and trying to own its body and the ley lines of influences, like it knows about a turning river, or wants to be one at least, like the Rio Brazos, or else something broader, and only wanted to see itself so as to swim the edges of itself, the river, to be always and perfectly vitiated by the depth of itself as possibility rather than fact, and dreaming of it constantly, the not knowing of it, and the possibility of its oceaning of itself, nevertheless, willfully opening its mouth wider and wider and wider now, so as to dissimulate, so as to forget about the entrapments of country and place, and dreaming of touching your skin, and waking up hungry for eggs and a little piece of an illuminated anything, and shook by the memory of this house that I sleep in, and mustard and cowboy films, 1, 2, 3, and A and X and Y and B and the fugitive kind. And have you noticed that you have the entire world inside your head as a train of missteps or tombstones in a brutal compression? Whilst we can carry our names around in lieu of any flagpole self-definition, come the end of any day, this could be nothing but this long-running little light you've lit for the escapist tendencies you carry around, opening eyes and craning ahead so that you see that what you see is already inside you, like granite and silex. You see it, working on the articulation of a ruin, like the ways we'll joke about our aspirations as tourists. Everything you might see, closer or beyond the names, like tracing the definitions of the word playa, as in a beached book or an overzealous idea rendered is unspeakable. Symbolic precedence of a tall glass of water that knows the difference between emotional tourism and a roadside attraction, knowing that all I might see is closer, is beyond the names, but wanting to drain one, nevertheless, I mean deep into something, a name like a glass or vessel opening water. Oh, mercy. Knowing a vessel is traditionally unspeakable. Unless you've a notion of what you're drinking and looking for light, we order one and a chaser as sinking suns, like Joe Pesci playing a supporting role, son or daughter neither. But knowing any actor dressed in pinks and riding purple canyons with a good sense of their history would suffice, and hunger, humour me, as they run against the whisper of waning conventions and the small winds of warning signs, whilst we work to confuse our hurricanes, like mountain's majesty or royal crown, and wading the rill of any river, looking for the integrity of a story in the shallower waters, on TV, both then and now, and knowing full well it's getting darker out, but we remain, humming out to a caramel-coloured anywhere sky, and we know that it is like this that we go on building ourselves for the second time. Looking to traffic like George Eastman, who, panning for meaning, 1880, would develop a camera capable of catching a moment as monument, down to the tune of 1/50th of a second, and selling the idea under the simple notion that now life did not have to stop, so as to build composite comparisons between people and places and airports, like David Foster Wallace and Dallas-Fort Worth, or alluding to the ways in which a dog could never be a Marxist, in spite of its developed sense of the pervasive and sophisticated authority of debt systems and moral codes and duty and the perpetuity of its hunger, the way that we know a dog has its day, its work, and its dinner, living its rituals, just like you in yourself and me in mine. And life is more vivid in a snake than in a butterfly. Life is more vivid in a wren than in an alligator. Life is more vivid in a cat than in an ostrich. The wind is blowing harder now, 50 knots or thereabouts. There's white caps on the ocean, and I'm watching for water spouts. A peach is romantic in Arthur O. Lovejoy's sense of the word. In his formative, intersecting essays on the discrimination of romanticisms, 1924, and the meaning of romanticism for the historian of ideas, 1941, Lovejoy asserts the disparity between alternative definitions of the romantic. Romanticism A may have one characteristic, presupposition or impulse X, which it shares with romanticism B, another characteristic Y, which it shares with romanticism C, to which X is wholly foreign. Accepting the distinction between iterations of the romantic and the necessity with which we need to attach each varying definition to a specific thinker or epochal period, the word romantic, for Lovejoy, has come to mean so many things that by itself it means nothing. It has ceased to perform the function of a verbal sign. When we call on a peach here, we're not thinking about peaches anymore. We're chewing on sunsets. And when we call on a sunset, we're talking about something else, about our attachment to all these disappearing things, about the drifting feelings and associations caught between the slow fade of days at this window. But I've not settled yet on what animal I look like most, when I know I won't go outside for days at a time, but I know that we're both sunsets and ancillary actors, supplicants to the terms of a story, romantic only in Lovejoy's eyes, like Ed Harris in Apollo 13, who slowly becomes the moon when he studies it. No chameleon, but a hypothesis born out of his own focus, exactly like the moon, or something else, sickle or full, anything else, turned on by a day, or the end of one, and always seeming to be considering whether a human could ever possibly control the tides of things as expeditiously as Ed Harris in Apollo 13, and his want to unpick a cover version of Lovejoy's line in a desert of industry and ideas. Instead, unwindingly, we celebrate the things outside of our control, like when the day is moving on like this, and remembering how we both look a little different at night time, as though looking at a new moon constantly, whilst faces are rising, or birdsong at the right time, as a chorus of grapples, my elected parliament. We pull good impressions of our machines to be fodder for the maintenance of any hour. Fix the hinges of a clock, like when a day is wanting to come on up in its Sunday best, like a good idea, knowing that an examination of its mechanics will be to turn itself into a kissing cousin for its constellations and difficulties, feasting on bull or crab in this vertigo of astronomies, and knowing only that dinner would recede, only to appear again as a different menagerie of animals in different time zones, in different countries, and talking like an adult about how you almost got where you were going. You sit back in your chair and look straight ahead, thumb a smoke from the pack, like a scented candle, or Robert Duval, filling a little room by accident. Aurora Borealis hits the big time, and for nothing but the delivery of a good word, and knowing all I know is a want to look straight back at that language, speak it elsewhere, and all I can say is a gentle, I reckon, like a courteous fucking cowboy, philosopher connoting country by vocabulary, or a laconic waiter at a table. I'm here for you, as though all this vernacular was informed by work of any second actor, as we fall down all Tom Noonan all over, and Tuesday Weld everywhere, and finger-pointing at the night sky, only to know that we're reworking a conception of body as observatory, so we look for a little line that could linger, an authored line, like good advice, or a poignant piece of well-hung nostalgia, whilst our remember when always seems like cotton clothes under a big sun. And as we dress up our ideas in breathable fabrics, as though our line of sight could rise a little, could float, be porous, and intimate the blah, 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 blah of it all, as though shape-shifting with the wind, and click, 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 consider the corners of the room you sit in, your ribcage, a juddering architecture, looking to make some fun of the idea of the rising rents in this town and the obligations to ourselves that we underline as we contest the asking price of any given thing and burn candles for our asymmetry as lowing a cow's forego for good the vastness of these pastures so sown with harm. July 3rd. There's been a load of compromising on the road to my horizon, in which art dealer Jose Carlos Bergantinos Diaz is arrested on a Friday. A luxury hotel in Seville, Glafira Rosales, Bergantinos Diaz's partner, was arraigned in New York in August. Orange in the courtyard. Accused of peddling counterfeit art for 15 years as undiscovered works by world-renowned artists. The indictment charged Rosales with several offences. She had charged 2 Manhattan art galleries more than $30 million for 36 pieces. 20th century abstract expressionists, Rothko, Motherwell, and and Klein. $80 million, $48 million in profits. The canvases had actually been created by a painter working from a studio at his home in Queens. Each piece exposed to extreme temperatures and the outdoors to artificially age it, authorities said. Residences in Switzerland and Mexico. A relative called and wished to remain anonymous. And after the indictment, they said, "We're at work on a different kind of work here. At work on the fine art of post-justification, looking to privatize meaning around the private gallery, looking to make light of things with all the clarity of a receding horizon, like how we see animals in cloud formations, and not thinking about what the plough is for after dark, and seeing faces in the surfaces of things as light refracts and bends, iterates the details of a private memory, considers its dollar value, and makes a buck." August 1st. We had fed the heart on fantasy. The heart's grown brutal from the fair. In the picture we are 17. There was a game that we would play on holiday. You knew a lot about chemistry and a great deal about the kinds of things we could get from the pharmacy, so we got pretty good at wasting the time we had in front of us, losing track of it, making fun of it, ignoring it. We would talk, blah, blah, blah. Watch the mouth curl around uncommon words. The talk itself was not irrevocably important afterwards, nor particularly erudite when recalled, but we knew that we had to keep it up. Keep it alert. Keep it going. Associate and dissimulate our terms. Colour in our conceptual rhymes. In a way it was important. Significant work. Sophisticated work. Work enough that we developed a heightened kind of spatial awareness of the arc of these conversations over and above any admiration for the diegetic run of a day. The corners were all theatres, the windows, museums, every doorway a public sculpture. We were pretty good at wasting the morning, at disrespecting the afternoon, finding ways to kill an evening. It's easy to blur it all with romance, but ours were all windfall peaches, accidental discoveries. But we were lighting out to frame precisely that, invent and own something beyond the nene play of beer and painkillers, and it was all a good appendage to camaraderie, the weight and the well of it. And it would all make you astutely aware of the edges of your body and the perimeters of alien objects and little things, the navigation of quieter things as we'd work on a little buzz. We would sit on the floor, drink and talk, entertain ourselves, and occasion an effort to entertain each other, knowing entertain was to hold in common in the old sense of the word, but it felt like we should be keeping a record of things. So, on Monday, we poured ourselves around a notebook. You had some iodine for our water, and the iodine would stain our skin as we would trickle it into plastic bottles. It had hold a yellowish kind of a nicotine connotation, an American mustard, the colour of a house bird, say, or the conjugation of something organic and something industrial. We would coat our palms in it, crack off the dripper and pour the mix into cupped hands, as though at some kind of a prayer or another, the ritual of it was enough. And we would hold the palm flat against a piece of paper and have a hand to little palmistry, as though this was an act pursuant to something, antecedent to something else. Like make-believe medicine men, we'd read futures and the vicissitudes of winds, discuss the placement of tropics across maps and the various laws of a variety of lands, the lassitude of given feelings, of held ideas and the imagining of our eventual responsibilities. and we would keep a record of the handprints, mark them up with transient thoughts, light them up like we were looking for something to read or knew how to read, give all the various lines diminutive annotations, every print a little totem, a connotative constellation of stray thoughts. You were acting like you were marking out your childhood home on a map, the longitude, the latitude, the lines and avenues of every print would be remarked upon. Fingers were named after roads, rivers, objects, obsessions. Age lines became songs, became movies, months, and the foundations of argument. Of four squaring the edges of any against, all before the iodine would fade. After a time, the prints would disappear completely. The iodine would evaporate off of the paper with exposure to the air, and all that would be left on these pages were these abstract lists of our objects of attention, an index of our distractions, clouding now, instead of rendered with the clear-minded temporal topography of a print. I kept 7 of them, named them by the days, Monday through and through. 10 years later, I look at the names we collected and find the names for important things divorced from the handle of all their associations. First, the Atlas Mountains. Second, the Great Depression. Third, a band called Journey. Fourth, the colour and connotation of the words Mountain Dew, etc. and on. These pieces of paper felt less and less like portraits of each other than they were photographs of that hotel where we would sit. Stay and know that nobody was watching. Knowing our associations, along with all their attendant properties, would vanish, recede, and be replaced by fresh preoccupations. Like we were lighting out to instigate a little semiotic housing crisis all of our own. We were working on a lookbook of 21st century interpretations of 20th century experiments. Morally, ours would be as empty as everyone else's. Whatever the weather, whatever the clouds were doing, whatever way the words would read, they would now hang like little points of light. A proscenium arch of unrelated ideas. Tangerine is remembering ochre. The pink is coming up from the floor. Nobody can remember who is who anymore. Recalling you, revised or otherwise, I can't remember if I gave that same notebook to you, or you just took it yourself later that year. We spent a lot of time together. We wanted to. It was always hard to keep track of the minutes, but nobody wanted to watch the clock. Whatever the case, you got it back to me eventually, the book. Over a little talk, you found several pages out on the table and talked through how you had drawn 4 pen portraits of those poets we had talked about, that we had lifted up out of some book of essays that some novelist had drawn together in their effort to try and shore up their position on things. An outlook. They were 4 stern faces, 4 faces looking straight ahead into an adolescent camera. 4 writers who, here and there, had given up writing to fight various causes. 4 writers who had gunned to fight for their country, fight for political change, fight for a more open interpretation of freedom, for a more concrete formalization of government, fight to close things down. 4 writers who had renounced the pressures of their own work and pastime for a heavier, more and more pressing or immediate cause. We had sat with them for a time, the drawings, and considered them and our distance from them. You had drawn them because of their shared renunciation of something. You had not drawn them because of their revolutionary fervour. That somehow seemed to hang a sweet little counterfactual around their work, weaponise our apathy a little, expose an engagement to some things, certain things, but a knowledge that each exposure existed at the expense of others. History was bigger than they were when placed as a train of unknowable faces on the table. They happily now stood like pretty pin-ups, there, but only for the celebration of renunciation, rather than revolution. I don't know why or what we meant by that, but we were young, maybe 16, maybe 17. On the reverse of each page was an early sketch of an element of each face: an eye, a hairline, a collar, a stretch of face that would run from an ear to the shadowy contours cloistered around the bridge and base of a nose and down to a pair of lips. I remember then talking to you over young drinks about how I wanted to keep the drawings until enough time had eclipsed that I didn't know who was who anymore, which face belonged to which country, to which conflict. It was then, and maybe only then, that these faces could be played with properly. It was a phasal thing, in part. We were young, and were living at the front of our faces most of the time. Thoughts would pool with a kind of aggressive energy around the bottom of the skull, float a little, and could easily be picked apart and played with. Looking at these faces, I didn't want to diminish the memory of their refusal, neither mine nor theirs. The work of these individuals had been recorded. We didn't need to cook them down to a kind of dull recitation of the past. Just consider the weight of their direction, the directives of their hour, the legs of our own. But that is what's difficult, you know. Maybe the most difficult, I think. Not prematurely forcing yourself into a space that's too small. You know those gates for cattle where they can go in of their own weight, their own volition, but they can't get out? The feeling was like cattle moving when we strove to organize these herded little thoughts. Like red meat, I always wanted them rare, these ideas. Blood seemed altogether an appropriate thing in this context. But it was murky, was rolling out and unfurling like a thick bank of stratus cloud. We thought that was interesting for a time. Maybe we were wrong. Looking back at them now, the faces, it felt like I had forgotten enough that I could be satisfied enough to do something with them all. In the closing lines of True Stories, in lines written by David Byrne, Stephen Tobolsky, and Beth Henley, Byrne speaks to camera a little, with a little on detail, on his want for a little remoteness. He needs familiarity to find the beauty and respect inherent to a place. Needs to know it, chart it encyclopedically, only to misremember it deliberately. It would be there and then that the thing, the place, the person could sit pretty. Like a hand on a remote control, we sit and scan the channels. We're looking to engage that want for beauty, that ever-increasing want. To never know what kind of animal we are and be simply entranced by other species, by other things. I know I'm no holiday, but we'll go to a restaurant, talk some of this through, and enjoy different deviations of distance. I don't know what kind of elevation a pop song gives things, or the association a singer brings to bear on this, but sitting here, looking for you, I feel like I can see far-off things behind almost every word. At the back end of the month, I pin the drawings to the wall and think a little about February, about mountains, about little deaths around patented things. I dip a finger in the telephone, crawl through Wikipedia entries, make a list. Marie Curie invented the process to isolate radium after co-discovering the radioactive elements radium and polonium. She died of aplastic anemia as a result of prolonged exposure to ionizing radiation emanating from her research materials. Karol Susek was a Canadian professional stuntman who developed a shock-absorbent barrel. He died following a demonstration involving the barrel being dropped from the roof of the Houston Astrodome. He was fatally wounded when his barrel hit the rim of the water tank meant to cushion his fall. Valerian Abakovsky constructed the Aerowagon, an experimental high-speed rail car fitted with an aircraft engine and propeller traction. It was intended to carry Soviet officials from place to place, and on the 24th of July, 1921, a group led by Fyodor Sergeyev took the wagon from Moscow to the Tula collieries to test it with Abakovsky also on board. They successfully arrived in Tula, but on the return route to Moscow, the Aerowagon derailed at a high speed, killing the full register of its passengers, including Abakovsky at the tender age of 25. Pyrrhus of Athens, circa 550 BCE, according to legend, was the first to be roasted in a brazen bull he made for Phalaris of Sicily for executing criminals. James Jimmy Heselden, having recently purchased the Segway production company, died in a single-vehicle Segway accident. Dean Cummin invented the Segway. William Bullock invented the Webb rotary printing press. Several years after its invention, his foot was crushed during the installation of a new machine in Philadelphia. The crushed foot developed gangrene and Bullock died during the amputation. Jim Fixx authored the best-selling book, The Complete Book of Running, 1977, and is credited with helping start America's fitness revolution, popularizing the run as a slow suburban ritual and demonstrating the health benefits of regular jogging. On 20th of July, 1984, Fixx died at the age of 52 of a fulminant heart attack after his daily run on Vermont Route 15 in Hardwick, Vermont. August 2nd, Torschlusspanik. Like an ocean, I need to garner a little more respect for the moon. Sometimes I'm left feeling a little like we were born to pose it simple queries, ask it simple yes and no questions. But the nights all demand a little noise these days around here, sometimes. A little noise here and there. We know nobody that will make that noise with us, so we keep the crowd small, pool our resources, play our cards close to our chest. Things are happening, moving, changing, shifting. Fires across the map. Bad ideas ratified, and the weather swells as though any attrition between fact and fiction, between poetry and science, will feel like a lost bar fight, poorly explained after the fact. Metaphor feels a little loose here now at the tailgate of another summer. When the rain falls like that on another country, when the fight becomes a little harder, a little more abstract in this one. But the distance, that distance, it increasingly feels like the only strong foot we have left to put forwards, a platform for analysis. Is that what distance provided now? Is that what was to be gleaned in this de familia, in its centenary? Not just disassociation, not the radical newness of finding a near thing appear errant and foreign again. We need things to be distant enough that we could ask them questions. A lunar enterprise. An estrangement fit to reignite expectant questions. Maybe defamiliarization is actually a heavier feeling, scarcely a rooster, but something big that we need to carry. A feeling goaded on by the slipping definitions of things, the drift, by the word in its own inability to self-define its properties, the proper uses of it as a thing, a declension, a pointing finger. It's that sense of loss when you're losing the reach of a dictionary, when you don't trust the ground that you stand on, when it doesn't feel like enough to feel a thing out like an emotional song. But is that not what songs are for, after all? To elevate little actions, let them hang in the air like perfect pieces of art. Defamiliarization as another Great Depression. Defamiliarization as a glossy magazine. An advert for the constancy of an abeyant option. The rotary turn of an anything goes kind of reading habit we all rehearse. We used to read paper things back to front. Now we crawl forwards, not knowing what we're looking for, but carrying the character of focus nonetheless. They say that like it's a bad thing. It appeals that we're all moving forwards now. It's hard to tell everyone apart in here. I finished my drink, finished my book. Nobody can remember who was who, but it wasn't like we were ever asking much, like we ever knew what we wanted. It wasn't as though we were asking what it actually felt like to walk on water. We can just wait another week, wait things out for another low tide, pick things up where we left off. August 3rd, singing bowl. Cézanne said he would astonish Paris with an apple. Louise Moyon is staring at a bowl of Curacao oranges. Some table somewhere in the back pages of 1634, and would let each orange stare straight back and behave like the rounded swell of punctuation point on a piece of paper peopled with adjectives. Everybody had their own relationship with nature, something in the blood. William S. Burroughs' mother was a flower arranger for Coca-Cola, sitting a chrysanthemum for an early advert. Maplethorpe said he just wanted to sell the public flowers, and forever fluoride. And we sit between the idea of a garden and its furniture, the kitchen, and talk about work, weathering the possibility of a storm, striving to better locate a bouquet of feeling and locate the things we could give away to mark an occasion.